My name is Leslie McClinton, and I'm 33 years old. A little over a year ago, in the January of 2025, my family threw a dinner to comfort me. I had lost a baby that winter, not my first loss, but the one that broke something in me that hadn't broken before. And my parents said we should all get together, just the family, to hold me up a little. That was the whole point of the evening, to hold me up. Halfway through that dinner, my older brother Royce set down his fork, looked around the table, and said, "Look, I love you all, but this family can't revolve around Leslie's sadness forever. Life keeps going. And speaking of life going on," and he reached over and took his wife's hand and grinned, "we've got some news. Tammy's pregnant. We're having a baby." My parents erupted. My mother cried the happy kind of tears she had not cried for me in months. My father stood up to shake Royce's hand. Someone got the good glasses down for a toast. And then my mother turned to me, beaming, holding up her phone to take a picture of the whole happy table, and said, "Leslie, honey, smile. Smile for the photo. Don't make this about the sad stuff. Smile for the photo at the dinner that was supposed to be for me," while they toasted the exact thing the doctors had just told me I might never have. I didn't argue. I've spent 33 years learning that arguing about my own feelings in this family just proves I'm the dramatic one. So I didn't. I stood up. And I said very quietly, "Royce, before she takes the picture, why did that text at 2 a.m. get unsent so fast?" And my brother's smile fell off his face before the flash ever went off, because he knew exactly which text I meant. And he knew that I had read it before he managed to delete it. Before I go any further, if you've ever had your grief treated like an inconvenience by the people who are supposed to hold you up, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps this story reach the people who need it. And drop your city and the time where you're listening from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel at night. I'm Leslie. This is the story of a dinner meant to comfort me, the brother who hijacked it on purpose, and the text he deleted 1 second too late. To understand the text, you have to understand my brother, and why a grown man would look at his grieving sister and decide her sadness was something to be conquered. There are two of us. Royce is 4 years older, and from the time we were kids, my brother needed to be the one everyone admired. I want to be precise about that word, admired, because it's the engine of this whole story. Royce didn't just want to be loved. Plenty of people want to be loved. Royce wanted to be impressive. He wanted the room to turn when he walked in. He wanted to be the one people talked about, looked up to, told stories about. He chased it his whole life, the achievements, the better car, the louder laugh, the way he worked a room at a party. And he got a lot of it. People do find Royce impressive. He's good-looking and he's charming when he wants to be, and he's done well for himself. But here is the thing that ate at him for 30-some years. The thing I didn't fully understand until I was standing at that dinner table. I was loved easily, and he never was. I'm not saying that to brag. It's almost the opposite. I'm ordinary in every way Royce is not. I'm a school librarian in Macon. I drive an old car. I don't work rooms. But people are just fond of me. Always have been. The other kids liked me without my trying. Teachers, neighbors, the parents of my friends, my coworkers now. It's not a thing I earned, and it's not a thing I'm proud of exactly. It's just a temperature I give off. People feel easy around me. They bring me their troubles. They remember my birthday. I'll give you a small picture of the two of us, because it tells you everything. When we were teenagers, Royce was the high school star, captain of things, dated the pretty girls, the kind of kid teachers wrote college recommendations about. I was 3 grades behind him, quiet, unremarkable, the girl who reshelved books in the library during lunch. And yet, I remember a night our family went to a restaurant, and the waitress, an older woman none of us knew, spent the whole meal warming to me, asking about the book I'd brought, laughing with me, slipping me an extra scoop of ice cream. "Because you've got a kind face, honey." Royce, the star, sat there charming and bright and got a normal smile, and I watched my brother's jaw tighten over a waitress, a stranger he'd never see again because she'd liked his bookish little sister more than him, without him being able to do a single thing about it. He couldn't outcompete it. There was no trophy for it, no way to win it. People just liked me, and it drove him quietly out of his mind. And Royce, who worked so hard to be admired, could never stand that his unremarkable little sister was simply effortlessly liked, that I got handed for free the warmth he had to perform for. He wanted admiration, and he got it. But admiration is a cold thing compared to being loved, and some part of my brother knew the difference, and hated that I had the warm thing without trying while he had only ever managed the cold one. He had the bigger life, and I had the warmer one, and he would have traded in a heartbeat. And the fact that you can't trade for it, that you can't earn your way into being easy to love, was the great unfixable insult of his life. And I was the walking reminder of it. For most of our lives, this stayed quiet, a coldness from him, an edge in his voice when people fussed over me, a way of changing the subject when I was the center of attention. He'd diminish me in small ways, introduce me as my little sister, the librarian, with a faint tone that made it sound smaller than it was, correct my stories, find the one flaw in my good news. I told myself I imagined it. He was my big brother. Why would he resent me? I had nothing he could want, and then I lost a baby, and the whole community wrapped its arms around me, and my brother finally found a level of attention on me that he could not stand to lose to. I need to tell you about the losses, and I'm going to do it gently, because some of you listening have lived this, and I won't make you live it again in detail. My husband Wendell and I wanted children for a long time, and my body, it turned out, is not good at this particular thing. There's a health reason. I'll spare you the medical name, it doesn't matter. But the plain version is that I have trouble both getting pregnant and staying pregnant. For us, a pregnancy was never a happy announcement. It was the start of holding our breath. We lost more than one. I'm not going to walk you through them. I'll just say that each one took something, and that the winter before that dinner, we lost one later than before, far enough along that we had let ourselves believe that we had a due date in our heads and a little name we said to each other in the dark. And when that one ended, something in me that had survived the earlier losses did not survive that one. There's a particular loneliness to this kind of grief that I didn't understand until I was inside it. When someone dies, the world has rituals. There's a funeral, people bring food. There's a grave you can visit, a name everyone agrees was real. When you lose a pregnancy, especially more than once, there's none of that. The world isn't sure you're allowed to grieve a person who never got to be a person to anyone but you. You mourn someone only you and your husband ever met, someone whose whole existence lived in a due date and a name said in the dark. And the world expects you to be quiet about it and quick about it. I learned to grieve in private because grieving in public made people uncomfortable. And making people uncomfortable was, in my family, the original sin. The doctor was kind and honest in the way good doctors are. She told us the truth, that with my body, the odds were low. Not impossible. She was careful never to say impossible, but low. That we could keep trying, but I should understand the chance was slim. I came out of that appointment and sat in the car in the parking lot for an hour. And I understood in a new and total way that the family I had pictured my whole life might simply never arrive, that I might be the one who didn't get the thing that everyone around me seemed to get without effort. My parents knew I'd lost the baby, but here is something I've had to make peace with. My parents are from a generation and a mindset that treats an early loss as a stumble, not a wound. It happens to so many women, honey. You're young. You'll have another. Everything happens for a reason. They were not cruel. They simply could not see the size of it. They knew I was sad. They thought I was sad the way you're sad about a rained-out wedding, a disappointment you get over. They did not know, because I never told them, because I'd learned long ago that my deeper feelings were treated as too much in this family, that the doctor had said low, that this wasn't a stumble, that a door I'd been trying to walk through my whole adult life was quietly, almost certainly, closing. And I want to be fair to my parents, because they are not the villains of this story. And the difference matters. They loved me in the limited way they knew how. My mother's smile for the photo, her, don't make it about the sad stuff. Those came from a woman who genuinely did not have the equipment to look directly at her daughter's pain. So she did what such people do. She tried to redirect everyone toward something happier and told herself that was kindness. It wasn't kindness, but it wasn't malice either. It was the small, ordinary failure of people who never learned that sometimes love means just sitting in the dark with someone instead of trying to turn on a light. I can forgive that in time. What I could not forgive was the person who saw the exact size of my grief in full and decided to use it. So, when my mother planned a dinner to comfort Leslie, she pictured cheering up a daughter who'd had a bad week. She had no idea she was throwing a dinner for the end of my hope. That gap between what they thought they were comforting and what I was actually grieving is going to matter. Hold on to it. If you've ever grieved something the people around you couldn't see the size of, tell me in the comments. I think the loneliest grief is the kind everyone thinks you should be over by now. There was one person in my family that winter who knew the real size of it. And that's the part that turns this from sad into something else. My sister-in-law, Tammy, Royce's wife, and I used to be close, genuinely close, in the years before all this. She was the one McClinton by marriage who felt like a friend. We'd text about nothing. She'd come to the library and have lunch with me. When she married Royce, I remember being so relieved. Finally, someone in this family I could talk to as an equal, someone who saw me as Lessie and not as Royce's quiet little sister. And in the worst of that winter, when I couldn't talk to my own mother because my mother kept telling me to look on the bright side, I talked to Tammy. I told her everything. I told her about the doctor saying low. I told her about the due date we'd had in our heads and the name. I told her I didn't know who I was if I wasn't going to be a mother because I'd wanted it that badly for that long. I cried on Tammy's couch, and she held my hand, and I thought, at least there's one person in this family who actually understands what's happening to me. I want to pause here, because I've thought about this part more than almost any other. I trusted her. I handed her the most fragile thing I had, the true measure of my grief. And I did it because I believed that's what closeness is, that you can give someone your soft underbelly, and they'll guard it, not catalog it. I was wrong about Tammy, but I'm not sorry I trusted. I'd rather be a person who trusts and gets it wrong than a person like my brother, who guards everything and trusts no one, and ends up alone inside his own performance. But I was wrong. I found out the night before that dinner exactly what she did with everything I told her. She told Royce. All of it. Not out of malice, I think. I've gone back and forth on Tammy, and I've landed on the idea that she's weak rather than wicked. That she repeated my pain to her husband the way couples repeat things. In bed at night, you won't believe what Lessie told me. My heart breaks for her. Never imagining what he'd do with it. But intentions don't unhand a weapon. She handed my brother the complete map of my deepest wound. She told him about the low. She told him the door was closing. She told him I'd said I didn't know who I was without this. Everything I'd given her to hold. She sat down in front of the one person in the world most likely to pick it up and use it as a tool. So when my brother decided what he decided, he was not acting in ignorance. He knew. He knew the dinner was meant to comfort a sister whose hope had just been declared nearly gone. He knew that announcing his wife's healthy pregnancy at that exact dinner, in that exact room, would land on me like a building falling. He didn't do it because he didn't understand. He did it because he understood completely. And he wanted the warm light of this family back on himself. And he had decided that my grief was a thing standing in his way. That distinction between a careless cruelty and a knowing one is the whole difference between a brother who hurt me by accident and the brother I actually have. I didn't know which one he was that winter. Part of me still wanted to believe he was just careless, just self-absorbed, the way I'd spent my whole life explaining away the edge in his voice. I found out which one he was at 2 a.m, the night before the dinner. The dinner was at my parents' house in Macon on a Wednesday in January. My mother had asked me to come the night before and stay over so we could have some time, just us girls, which I now understand was its own small kindness she didn't know how to follow through on. She didn't actually know what to say to me. So mostly we watched television, and she made my favorite cobbler, and we didn't talk about the thing at all. Royce and Tammy were coming the next day. Royce, though, had stopped by that evening to drop something off, and he'd left his phone charging on the kitchen counter overnight. He'd had a few drinks, and my dad had driven him home, and he'd forgotten it. I couldn't sleep. I almost never could that winter. So at 2 a.m, I went down to the kitchen for a glass of water, in the dark, in my socks. The way you move through your parents' house when you're 33, and it's 2 a.m., and your whole life feels like it's been quietly canceled. The house was the house I grew up in. Same hum of the same old refrigerator. Same creak in the third stair. I knew it in the dark without turning on a light. And there's something about moving through your childhood home in the middle of the night as a grieving adult that makes you feel like a ghost haunting your own past. And my brother's phone on the counter lit up. I wasn't snooping. I want to be very clear about that because it matters to me. The phone was face up on the counter where he'd left it charging, and it lit up the dark kitchen like a little flare, and the message was right there, big on the screen, the way a preview shows before you even unlock anything. I didn't touch it. I didn't pick it up. I read it the way you read a billboard you didn't ask to see, because it was bright, and it was right in front of my face in a dark room. It was from Tammy, and I read it before I even decided to read it. It said, "Are you sure we should announce at Leslie's dinner? The poor thing. It feels cruel." And while I stood there, my stomach dropping toward the floor, 3 dots appeared. Royce was awake too, wherever he was, texting his wife at 2 a.m. And his reply came up on the screen, right in front of me, 1 line at a time. At her dinner, yeah. She needs to learn to move on. This family can't revolve around her thing forever. I read it twice, standing very still in the dark, the cold kitchen tile under my socked feet. She needs to learn to move on. Her thing. My loss, the due date, the name we said in the dark, the door closing on my whole life, reduced to her thing. An inconvenience my brother had decided to cure by force at the dinner meant to hold me up. Because the attention on my grief was attention that wasn't on him. And his wife had asked him plainly, "Isn't this cruel?" She'd seen it. She'd named it. And he'd said at her dinner, yeah, like cruelty was just the cost of doing business, like the cruelty was almost the point. And then, as I stood there, the message disappeared, just vanished off the screen. Royce unsent a message. He deleted it, maybe thought better of having it in writing. Maybe Tammy told him to. Maybe some animal instinct told him a written confession is a dangerous thing to leave lying around. 1 second later, and I'd never have seen it. 1 second. But I saw it. I read every word. And the words went into me and did not come back out. I stood in my parents' dark kitchen with my glass of water, and I did not cry. Something colder than crying happened. For the first time in my life, I understood exactly who my brother was, and exactly what tomorrow's dinner was going to be. And I understood that no one in that house was going to protect me, but me. I want to tell you what I did with the rest of that night, because it's not what you'd expect. I didn't wake anyone. I didn't confront Royce by text. I didn't scream into a pillow. I went back upstairs and I lay in my childhood bedroom. And I thought very calmly about 33 years of being the one whose feelings were too much, the one told to smile, the one whose grief was an imposition. And I thought about the text. She needs to learn to move on. And I made a decision that surprised me. I decided I was going to go to the dinner. I was going to let it happen because I finally understood something about my family that I'd spent my whole life not letting myself see. The truth in this family never survived in private. If I confronted Royce alone, he'd deny the text ever existed. He'd already deleted it. It was my word against his, and my family had never once taken my word over the impressive ones. He'd tell everyone I was unstable with grief, imagining things, making his happy news about me, and they'd believe him because believing him was easier and because I was the dramatic one. By the next family gathering, I'd be the bitter sister who tried to ruin Royce's announcement. I'd watched this exact mechanism work my whole life. The time he borrowed money from our parents and never paid it back. And somehow I was the one scolded for keeping score when I mentioned it. The time he forgot my college graduation entirely because it conflicted with a work trip he could have moved, and the family decided I was being selfish for being hurt. Royce had a gift, honed over decades, for committing the offense and then relocating the blame onto whoever objected to it. If I objected in private, I would become the offense. I knew this the way I knew the creak in the third stair. The text had been sent in the dark, in private, where my brother did his real thinking. The only place the truth could survive was in the light, in front of everyone. At the very dinner he'd chosen as his stage, he wanted an audience for his cruelty. Fine. The same audience could watch me name it. I didn't have a screenshot. It had vanished too fast. I'd had no time to do anything but read it and feel it. All I had was the truth and a single question. But I'd realized, lying there in my childhood bed, that I didn't need proof in the way you need proof in a courtroom. This was never going to be a courtroom. I needed only to ask the question in front of everyone and let my brother's own face answer it. Because a man who has done nothing wrong looks confused when you ask him a strange question. He frowns. He asks what you mean. He's genuinely puzzled. But a man who has deleted exactly the thing you're asking about looks like he's been struck. His body betrays him before his mouth can catch up. I was betting everything on that involuntary half-second, on the difference between confusion and panic, which no one can fake and no one can hide. I knew my brother. I knew his face would confess what his deleted text no longer could. It was a terrifying bet. If I was wrong about his face, if he were a better liar than I thought, I'd be exactly the unstable, jealous sister he'd paint me as, and I'd have done it to myself in front of everyone, at his moment of triumph. I lay awake until the sky went gray, turning it over, and I decided to trust the one thing I'd learned in 33 years of watching my brother, that under all his performance, Royce had a tell, and the tell was that he could not bear to be seen. Ask him a question that meant he'd been seen, and the performer would drop the mask for just long enough. If you've ever had to choose between fighting in private where you'll lose and standing up in public where it's terrifying but true, tell me below what you chose. I know how much courage the second one takes. The dinner was lovely on the surface, the way the worst things in my family always are. My mother had cooked all day. The good tablecloth was out. There were maybe 9 of us. My parents, Royce and Tammy, my husband Wendell, my Aunt Carlene, a couple of cousins. Everyone was being gentle with me, in the vague way people are gentle when they know you're sad but don't know what to say. Lots of soft smiles and hands on my shoulder and, "How are you doing, sweetheart?" in the voice you'd use on someone recovering from surgery. And I watched my brother work the table the way he always did, telling his stories, being impressive. And I watched him glance at me every so often with something I could finally read now. Impatience. He was waiting. He had a grenade in his pocket, and he was waiting for the right moment to pull the pin. And underneath his charm, he was annoyed that the table kept circling back to me, kept asking me how I was, kept giving me the warm attention he had driven across town to take back. It's a strange thing to sit at a table and watch a person you've known your whole life and finally see them clearly. For 33 years, I'd looked at Royce and seen my big brother, flawed, self-absorbed, but mine. That night, I looked at him and saw the whole architecture of him, how every story he told bent back toward himself, how he tracked the table's attention like a man watching a stock ticker, how a flicker of irritation crossed his face each time someone touched my shoulder or asked after me. He was doing math all through that dinner, the math he'd done his whole life, measuring how much warmth was going to me versus to him, and finding the balance intolerable. I'd never been able to see it before because I'd never wanted to. You don't want to know that about your brother. But the text had taken away my ability to not know. Tammy wouldn't look at me. That's how I knew the text had been real and not some fever dream of 2 a.m. My sister-in-law, who used to be my friend, who had held my hand on her couch while I cried, could not meet my eyes across the table, and her not looking told me everything about what she knew was coming. She pushed her food around her plate. She laughed a beat too late at the jokes. She had the look of a person sitting next to a fire she'd helped build and was only now realizing she couldn't control. Wendell, my husband, sat beside me with his hand on my knee under the table. I hadn't told him about the text. There hadn't been a moment, and I hadn't wanted to put it in his hands to carry, hadn't wanted to watch him spend the dinner furious. But he could feel that I was strange that night, wound tight, humming like a wire, and he kept looking at me with a question in his eyes. And I kept squeezing his hand to say, "Not yet. It's okay. Stay with me." He trusted me. That's the thing about Wendell. He spent our whole marriage trusting that I know what I'm doing, even when he can't see the whole picture. And that trust, that one warm certainty at my side, was probably the thing that let me do what I did next. And then, between the main course and the cobbler, my brother set down his fork, and I felt the whole evening tip, and I knew the moment had come. "Look," Royce said in his easy, room-commanding voice. "I love you all, but this family can't revolve around Leslie's sadness forever. Life keeps going." The table went a little quiet. a couple of uncomfortable glances. It was a strange thing to say at a dinner that was, after all, specifically about Leslie's sadness. But Royce had a way of saying things that should have landed wrong and making them sound reasonable, wise even. And I watched my parents' faces do the thing they always did, rearranging to agree with him. And speaking of life going on, he said, and he reached over and took Tammy's hand and grinned that grin. "We've got some news. Tammy's pregnant. We're having a baby." The table erupted. I want you to understand that I had known this was coming for 30 hours, and it still landed like a physical blow. Knowing the punch is coming doesn't stop it from breaking your nose. My mother burst into tears, joyful ones, her hands flying to her face, the happy tears she had not cried for me in months, had maybe never cried for me. My father shot up to pump Royce's hand. "Attaboy, congratulations, son." My Aunt Carlene gasped and clasped her hands. Someone said, "Get the good glasses. This calls for a toast." And chairs scraped, and there was that warm chaos of a family receiving wonderful news. The exact warmth that had been pointed at me, briefly for one winter, now swinging back to its rightful owner like a door closing on a draft. And it was a healthy pregnancy, an easy one. Tammy had told me back when we were still close, before any of this. No trouble conceiving, no scares. The kind of pregnancy that just works the way bodies are supposed to. The thing my body could not do, announced by my brother at my dinner, into the open wound of my grief, on purpose with full knowledge. I sat there and felt every cheer land on me like a small stone, and I understood that to everyone else in that room, this was simply a beautiful moment, and my failure to glow through it would be remembered as me being difficult, me being unable to be happy for my brother, me making it about myself, unless I did something. Unless I made the truth visible before the moment closed over it like water. My mother got out her phone. She was glowing, lit up the way I'd ached my whole life to see her light up for me. She gathered everyone with her eyes for a photo, the whole happy table, and she pointed the phone at us, and then she looked at me, sitting there, not glowing, not cheering, the still gray spot in her bright picture. And she said, "Leslie, honey, smile. Smile for the photo. Don't make this about the sad stuff. Don't make this about the sad stuff." At the dinner that was supposed to be about the sad stuff, about me, the dinner had been mine for exactly one course, and now even the camera was being asked to crop my grief out of the frame so the happy people could have their picture. That's the moment I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to know that. After everything, I never once raised my voice that night. I stood up, and the table looked at me. And for 1 second, everyone thought I was standing to make a toast, to be gracious, to do the thing the good sister does. Congratulate the happy couple and swallow it, the way I'd swallowed everything my whole life. I looked at my brother and I said quietly, "Royce, before Mom takes the picture, I have one question. Why did that text at 2 a.m. get unsent so fast?" And I watched it happen. I watched my brother's face, which had been lit up with triumph and good news, simply collapse. The grin slid off it. The color went. His eyes did a fast, panicked thing, flicking to Tammy and back to me. and Tammy made a small sound and put her hand over her mouth. The flash never even went off. My mother had lowered the phone, confused, looking between her two children. It was exactly the half-second I'd bet everything on. Not confusion, panic. The look of a man who has just discovered that the thing he buried was dug up while he slept. If I'd had any lingering doubt, any small hope that maybe I'd misread the text in the dark, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. His face erased it. His face was a confession. Everyone at that table saw it, even the ones who didn't yet understand what they were seeing. You don't look like that when you're innocent. You look like that when you've been caught. What text? Royce said. But it came out wrong. Too fast, too high. His voice climbing right past calm. What are you talking about? The one Tammy sent you last night, I said, still quiet. I kept my voice low and level on purpose because I'd learned in that dark kitchen that the quieter I stayed, the louder his panic would look by contrast. Asking if you were sure you should announce at my dinner. Because it felt cruel. And the one you sent back before you deleted it. I looked around the table at all their confused faces. My father half risen from his handshake. My Aunt Carlene frozen with the good glasses in her hands. My cousins not breathing. And I said the words out loud. The words that had been sent in the dark where my brother did his real thinking. You wrote she needs to learn to move on. This family can't revolve around her thing forever. You called it my thing, Royce. My baby. The one I lost. My thing. I let that sit 1 second. Then I gave them the rest. Because the rest was the part that mattered. And you planned this. You planned to announce your good news at the dinner meant to comfort me. On purpose, because Tammy told you everything I told her. You knew the doctor said it was nearly impossible for me. You knew the exact size of it. More than Mom knows, more than anyone at this table knows. You knew this would break me. And you picked tonight anyway. Not because you didn't understand, because you did. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Royce reached for the lie, because that's what Royce does. Listen to her, she's not well, she's grieving. She's making my announcement about herself. This is exactly but it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work was Tammy. Because everyone at that table had now turned to look at Tammy. Tammy, who had not been able to look at me all night. Tammy with her hand over her mouth and tears starting in her eyes. And when Royce said she's not well, she's imagining it. Tammy made a sound like something breaking. And she said, Royce, she's not imagining it. She was crying now, openly. I did send it. I asked you if we should wait, and you said what she said, you said. She was shaking. I have it. I didn't delete mine. And she put her own phone on the table, face up, in the middle of all of us, with the conversation still on it, her question and his answer, side by side, the words he'd erased from his own phone still sitting undeleted on his wife's. He'd deleted his copy in a panic at 2 a.m. He never thought about hers. Of course he didn't. Royce only ever thinks about covering his own tracks. It would never occur to him that the person he'd pulled into his cruelty might keep the evidence, might one day need it to live with herself. For a moment, nobody moved. Then my mother reached out and picked up Tammy's phone with a shaking hand, and I watched my mother read it. I watched her eyes move across the words she needs to learn to move on in her thing, and I watched the joy that had been on her face 2 minutes ago, the joy of a grandmother-to-be, curdle into something I had never seen on my mother before. Horror, plain horror. Because even my mother, who thought a lost baby was a stumble you got over, who had just told me to smile for the photo, even she could not read those words and pretend they meant anything other than what they meant. She set the phone down very slowly. She looked at me, and her voice came out small and cracked, nothing like her usual certainty. "Leslie, the doctor said it was nearly impossible. You never told me that. I thought you'd just try again. I thought it was—" She couldn't finish. The whole shape of what she'd misunderstood was arriving in her all at once. And then she turned to her son, and her face hardened into something I'd never seen her aim at Royce in my entire life, because Royce was the one she defended, always, automatically. Royce, you knew it was that serious for her. You knew. And you did this on purpose, at the dinner I made to comfort her, and there it was, the gap I told you to hold on to closing in real time. My parents hadn't known the true size of my grief, and so their failures had been the small, ignorant kind, the smile for the photo kind. But Royce had known the exact size of it, had been handed the precise measurements, and had used them. My mother understood that difference sitting at that table, and I watched it break something in her that my loss alone never had, because the loss was no one's fault. But this was her son, and he had done it knowing. And then my brother lost control, the way people do when the performance finally fails completely. "Fine," he said, shoving his chair back so hard it scraped. "Fine, yes, I knew. And you know what? I'm not sorry. Do you have any idea what it's been like? Months. Months of this whole family tiptoeing around Leslie. Leslie's so sad. Poor Leslie. Have you checked on Leslie? Like the rest of us don't exist. Like my whole life is just supposed to stop because she can't." He caught himself, but only barely. And what came out instead was almost worse, was the truest thing my brother has ever said. Everybody always loved her more. For nothing. For nothing. I had to earn every scrap of it, and she just gets it. She's always just gotten it. Her whole life, people falling all over themselves for quiet little Leslie, who never did anything special in her life. She loses a pregnancy, and suddenly she's the center of the entire universe. And I'm supposed to just sit there and clap for her grief? I finally have good news. Mine. Something that's actually mine. And I wasn't going to let her sadness swallow the way she swallows everything. He stopped. The words hung there in the air over my mother's good tablecloth, and I watched him hear himself. I watched my brother realize slowly, in the absolute silence of that table, what he had just said out loud, in front of his parents, his weeping wife, his aunt, his cousins, his sister. That he had taken his sister's worst grief and weaponized his own happiness against it, on purpose, because he was jealous that people loved her without her trying. He had wanted his entire life to be admired. He had built everything around being the one the room turned toward, And in that moment, every single person at that table was turned toward him, giving him their complete and undivided attention. And it was the exact opposite of admiration. It was revulsion. He had finally fully become the center of the room, and the center of the room was the worst place he had ever stood. My father sat back down. He hadn't said a word this whole time. My father, who'd leapt up to shake Royce's hand 10 minutes earlier. He looked at his son for a long moment. And then he looked away at the wall like he couldn't stand the sight, and that my gentle, conflict-avoiding father turning his face away landed on Royce harder than anything I could have said. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "You're right that people love me, Royce," I said. And I wasn't being cruel. I was just finally saying the true thing, the thing I'd understood lying awake the night before. But it was never because I took it from you. There was always enough. Love isn't a pie where my slice means you go hungry. You just never believed that, so you spent your whole life treating it like a competition no one else even knew they were in, and starving the whole time, next to people who'd have loved you freely if you'd ever once stopped performing long enough to let them. And tonight you did the one thing that guarantees you lose the contest you've been running your whole life. Nobody at this table will ever look at you the same way again. And I didn't do that to you. You did it the second you decided my dead baby was a thing standing between you and the attention you thought you were owed. The aftermath was quieter than the dinner, the way it always is. Nobody took a photo that night. The cobbler sat on the counter untouched. Royce left first. He grabbed his keys and walked out into the dark, and Tammy did not go with him. She stayed, crying at the table, and my mother, of all people, ended up comforting her. The two of them who'd both, in their different ways, helped wound me, holding each other in the wreckage. I didn't have it in me to comfort Tammy that night, but I didn't hate her even then. She'd been weak, and weakness had let her hand my brother the knife, but she was also the one who refused, in the end, to let him call me crazy. She put her phone on the table. In the one moment that counted, with her marriage and her husband's reputation on the line, she chose the truth over him. That took something, and I haven't forgotten it. Tammy and I are slowly finding our way back to being something to each other, not what we were, but something more honest. She apologized, really apologized, weeks later. Not the reframing kind, but the real kind. I told him things you trusted me with, and I watched what he did with them. And I'll carry that. I'm sorry, Leslie. She left Royce that summer for reasons that were partly this, and partly, I think, that the dinner showed her who she'd married more clearly than years of marriage had. Their baby has Royce's eyes, and I hope none of the rest of him. I'm an aunt now. I show up. The child didn't choose its father. Royce paid a price, and I want to tell you what it was, because it's exactly the price a man like my brother feels most, and because it's the kind of justice this world actually delivers, not the courtroom kind people fantasize about. He didn't go to jail, he didn't break a law. This was never that kind of story. What Royce lost was the one thing he'd spent his entire life building and guarding: the good opinion of the people around him, the admiration, the shine. By the next week, the whole extended family knew what he'd done. Not because I told them, I never had to. The table had been full of witnesses. My Aunt Carlene told her sisters. The cousins told everyone their age. The story of what Royce did at the dinner meant to comfort his grieving sister traveled through that family like cold water, finding every low place, and everywhere it reached, a little more of my brother's carefully built shine came off and did not come back. And here is the cruel, perfect arithmetic of it, the thing he could never have seen coming, because he never understood how love and regard actually work. Roy spent his whole life believing admiration was the prize, and that I'd somehow stolen the supply. But admiration, real regard, was never something you could win by being impressive. It was something people gave freely to those they trusted to be decent. The night he proved he was not decent, proved it in front of everyone, in his own words. He didn't just fail to win the prize. He destroyed his own access to it permanently with his own hands. He will spend years now being the man who did that. At family gatherings, at the periphery of conversations, in the slight cooling of every room he enters. For someone who needed to be admired more than he needed to breathe, there is no heavier sentence, and no judge handed it down. He sentenced himself at 2 a.m. in a text he thought he deleted. My parents and I are still finding our way. My mother has apologized more times than I can count, not for the grand cruelty, which was Royce's, but for her own smaller one, the not seeing, the smile for the photo, the years of treating my deep feelings as too much. I didn't know how to look at how much it hurt you, she told me. So I told myself it didn't hurt that much. That was easier for me. And easier for me cost you everything. I'm sorry, baby. I should have looked. It doesn't undo it, but she's looking now. She asks me real questions now and waits for real answers. And when I give her a real one, a hard one, a sad one, she doesn't flinch away or rush me toward the bright side. She just sits in it with me. At 60-some years old, my mother is learning to do the one thing she never could, and watching a person change that late for you is its own strange gift. My father took longer, the way quiet men do. He's never been one for words. His whole life he kept the peace by saying nothing, and saying nothing is how Royce always got away with everything. But a few weeks after the dinner, my father drove to my house on a Saturday, and he sat at my kitchen table, and he said in his slow way, I turned my face away from him at that table. Did you see? I said I did. He nodded. 50 years I looked the other way when your brother did things. Turned my face away from you, really. Every time by not turning it toward him. I'm done doing that. It was the longest speech about feelings my father had given in my lifetime. Then he fixed the squeaky hinge on my back door, because that's how my father says things he doesn't have words for, and he went home. But something had shifted. He'd finally turned his face the right way. As for the relationship with Royce, there isn't one right now, and I've made my peace with that not being a tragedy. People assume the goal is always reconciliation, that a story like this should end with the family stitched back together. But some things, when they're shown to you in the daylight, can't be unseen and shouldn't be. My brother knows where I live. The door is open the careful inch it needs to be open for his child's sake. The rest is up to whether he ever becomes a person worth opening it further for. That's his work, not mine. I spent 33 years doing the work of holding this family's comfort together. I'm done volunteering for the job. Too. And here is the part I almost didn't believe I'd get to tell you. About 7 months after that dinner, in the late summer of that year, I got pregnant again. I want to be careful here, because I know some of you are listening to this in the exact dark place I was in that winter, and I would never, ever wave a miracle in front of you as if it's owed to everyone. It isn't. My doctor never said impossible. She said low, and she was right too. And low is a hard, real number that doesn't come true for everyone who hopes. And I will not pretend otherwise to give this story a bow. For too many people, low stays low. I know that. I lived years inside that knowing, but low was never the same as none. And that's the thing my family's cruelty actually taught me, in a backwards and unwanted way. The difference between hard and never. My brother had treated my hope as already dead, a thing to be buried so the family could move on, so the room could be comfortable again, so the attention could swing back to him. He'd looked at Lo and decided it meant over, because that was convenient for him. But the doctors never said it was over. They said it was hard, and those are not the same word, no matter how badly someone needs them to be. Hard, with the right care. A doctor who watched me like a hawk this time, who caught things early, who treated my body like something worth fighting for instead of something that kept failing, and with a body I slowly, finally stopped hating, and a husband who held his breath beside me for 9 long months, and a whole lot of refusing to let anyone tell me to move on before I was ready. Hard this time. Held. She's here now. She's small and she's loud and she has Wendell's eyes, and she was born this past spring, in May, after the long hard work of a pregnancy watched over every single week. When I look at her, I do not think about my brother at all, which is its own quiet kind of healing. The people who hurt you don't get to live in the room where you keep your daughter. He's met her once. The family is what it is. Doors are open, a careful inch. But when I hold her at 2 a.m, the same hour I once stood in a dark kitchen and read the worst thing my brother ever wrote, I think about how close I came to letting that text be the last word on what my life was allowed to be. And it wasn't. It wasn't even close to the last word. My brother said this family couldn't revolve around my sadness forever. He was right in a way he never meant. It couldn't and it shouldn't have. And the cruelest thing was never that my grief was big. Grief is supposed to be big. That's what makes it grief. The cruelest thing was that the people who should have simply sat in the dark with me kept trying to make me put my grief down before I was ready, so the room could be comfortable again, so the conversation could move on to brighter things, so nobody had to feel the weight of what I was carrying. My mother did it gently, out of not knowing how to look. My brother did it like a blade, knowing exactly where to cut. But underneath both was the same family rule I'd lived under my whole life. Your pain is an inconvenience to the rest of us, so make it smaller, make it quieter, make it disappear. I stood up at that table not to make the family revolve around my sadness. I never needed to be the center of anything. That was Royce's hunger, never mine. I stood up because I was done being asked to smile over the worst thing that ever happened to me, so that other people wouldn't have to feel it. I stood up because grief that you're forbidden to show doesn't heal. It just goes underground and waits. I stood up, finally, at 33, to stop being asked to be too little. He deleted the text 1 second too late, and in that 1 second, my brother taught the whole family the thing he'd spent his life hiding, and I'd spent my life doubting, that I was never too much. My feelings were never too big. My grief was never too loud. My heart was never the problem in this family. I was just finally, after 33 years, unwilling to be too little so that everyone else could stay comfortable. And the strangest, sweetest part is that the daughter they kept asking to shrink turned out to be exactly big enough, in the end, to hold a whole new life, the one with Wendell's eyes asleep in the next room as I tell you this,